Hey, good evening, everyone. Just I'm with George here. We're gonna do like an hour discussion or so, just a quick chat on some current relevant geopolitical topics, intrigues primarily involving the Vatican. But yeah, George, keep your well before we just went on air, George. You had a thought in mind. You can lead us off here tonight.
Well, hello, Eric, and have a good evening. And I say evening, it's about 10 p.m. Pacific where I am on the West Coast, Cadena, California. And thank you for having me on, Eric. And there's all sorts of topics we need to discuss. And I don't need to keep belaboring this point, but I'd like to talk about the situation in New Zealand. Just a reminder, last month on March the 15th, apparently three or four people went into mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, and killed something like 50 people and wounded dozens more. One of the lead shooters was Tarrant. I forgot his first name. He was an immigrant. He had moved from Sydney, Australia, to or a town near Sydney, Australia, to Christchurch, to New Zealand. The town where he's from was about 500 kilometers or 300 miles from Sydney, and the media has portrayed him as being a white nationalist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, skinhead, and he probably kicks his dog as well. And he, as we are discussing, he posted a massive manifesto in which he had uh, said that he was members of the Knights Templar. Now, something we were discussing before Eric and I were discussing before the show, is that whenever people alleged killers, mass murderers publish a manifesto, either online or in print form, that always makes me suspicious. Okay, as Eric was saying, this is probably ghost written. For example, back in the 1990s, there was a killer uh, named Theodore Robert Kaczynski. Well, he's still alive. He was in federal prison in Colorado. Ted Kaczynski was known as a Unabomber. He struck several institutions across the U.S. from late 1970s until 1995. University of Michigan, University of California, Berkeley, I believe Northwestern, in Chicago, outside of Chicago. He either sent the bombs to these institutions or from these institutions, hence the name the Unabomber. Now, there's some strong speculation. People like Johnny have talked about this, that he was probably one of the places, I believe he got his undergrad degree from Harvard in the 1960s. And he probably was involved with the CIA or
Well, absolutely.
FBI.
Like Harvard is like a CIA. It came out that they were doing even like MK Ultra research at Harvard.
Yes.
Like I think the New York Times they released like a list of like 60 schools. Actually in the Emmanuel Jovison book, I I did a video on in my last video. He writes about how the Rockefellers have given millions of dollars to Harvard. He says it's like a nest for their conspirators that come out of Harvard. And we know Harvard literally has a Roman laurel wreath right on their logo. I'm pretty sure if
Well,
you look into the history, like Nazis have gotten jobs at Harvard. For instance, what was this? Oh, I forgot the cardinal. Didn't Harvard have like a recent cardinal honored on like their academic society, and there was a cardinal with pedophilia accusations.
I'm not sure, but
I know. I
yes,
think
it probably has
Johnny had info on that, but Harvard.
McCarran
Yeah, I think it was McCarrick. Yeah, I think yeah
or
McCarrick.
Burl. Okay, so you're talking about Donald Verl or Theodore Cardinal, or Theodore was ex-Cardinal
Well,
McCarrick.
actually, with Whirl, I think Whirl probably is on a board at Harvard, but Whirl is on like the presidential commission for scholars, and
Mhm.
he hasn't been revoked since the pedophilia accusations have come out, which I think is interesting.
Well,
But sorry to keep going, George, but it's interesting that this Kaminsky terrorist was educated at Harvard, like one of the elitist schools in the United States. Like, isn't Harvard in the list of schools that have come out in the recent price gouging scandal with like the U.S. or like it was the bribery scandal. Like rich families would bribe schools to like give their students like more favorable marks. I'm pretty sure Harvard was in that batch of schools
Well,
also.
well, don't get me wrong, Kaczynski got in there on their merits. He's probably a genius. He went to school at like 16 or something. He went to Harvard, Michigan.
Well,
Forgot where
absolutely.
he.
He wouldn't have been used, as like a pawn of like the Jesuits if he wasn't like a genius. Sorry, keep going.
Okay, so, but anyhow, as I was saying, he is of a Polish Catholic background from Chicago. Um, so he got hired as a professor. He was on a tenure track at the University of California, Berkeley in the late 1960s, like 67, 68, thereabouts. But he decided, I guess they decided not to hire him because he has some, even though he's a brilliant professor, he just has some really bad social skills. So by the early 1970s, he almost literally fell off the face of the earth. I mean, he just disappeared. They have no idea how he survived because he wasn't working as a professor or college instructor or tutor, anything like that. So there's something like roughly 25 years of his life that are almost completely unaccounted for. How did he survive? So I guess he's able to cobble together some money and buy a cabin uh, somewhere in Montana. So he was able to send these bombs and send these letters to various places across the country for decades. Well, anyhow, speaking of manifestos, in 1995, he sent a bomb to somebody in Sacramento, California. This is in April 1995, just like a week or so after the Oklahoma City bombing. And so that would have been like late April or so. Um, and he sends out this massive rambling diatribe to the New York Times. I never read it. It was, and I guess his younger brother David recognized Ted's writing and decided to contact the FBI. And so I guess within a few weeks or so, they found out who he was, so the story goes, and they arrested him. So whenever you hear manifesto or something like that, I'm almost always suspicious. Okay, that's okay. The author whom they say wrote it almost certainly did not write it. Um, whether you're talking
Well,
like,
absolutely. Like even mainstream figures, like if I know you mentioned you want to talk about the FBI, but it came at J. Edgar Hoover didn't write any of his quote unquote manifestos. But in particular, his main book, Masters of Deceit, his quote unquote classic,
mhm.
where Hoover supposedly ousts like the communists that are subverting the United States. Like that wasn't written by him.
Well, funny
And
you
I
mentioned
think
Hoover.
just probably the most important manifesto would probably be the Communist Manifesto that we've
Mhm.
seen become implemented like worldwide in society. And I don't think the Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx fully by him. He may have written sections of it, but it was doubtlessly, I think, ghost written by Jesuits. Uh, I think, given Marx's background of being brought up by Jesuits in Trier, like Trier, the most Catholic province in Germany. And I've seen passages of like just Marx shared like the Jesuitical like anti-Semitic like arrogance as well, which I think is odd, considering Marx was a Jew himself.
Well,
And just on that, just with Marx being anti-Semitic, it's just another connection. You see how like the Jews that work for the papacy, like really kiss the ring. Like the Rothschilds have like notoriously funded multiple anti-Semitic newspapers over the years.
mhm.
An instance during the Dreyfus affair back in the late 1800s in France, when a Jew Dreyfus was falsely convicted of selling the French military secrets to the Germans. Like the Rothschilds were working with the Jesuits and the papacy to drive up that anti-Semitic hysteria.
Well, and of
But
course,
the power of ghostwriting is in terms of just for like the Jesuits to, or the conspirators in general to perpetuate their agenda. It's very effective, even on smaller levels. Like it's recently, I saw this came out like 2 weeks ago. Like the New York Times had a so-called like this isn't I'm gonna this sort of ties in, but like what they do is like they print false narrative stories all the time. They'll say that, oh, this person was an actual like I'm bringing up the New York Times because there's literally a story yesterday with this so-called woman who was living in Venezuela. She was complaining of how Maduro was like starving there. It was literally like the Saddam Hussein babies with incubators. Exact same thing from the 80s. She's like, oh, like we're living in Venezuela, and like he's like enslaving our people. He's like, my parents fled when Chavez took power in like the 70s, and Chavez didn't even take power till like 1998. No, for instance. So like there was like a slip up on like live TV right there that's like that's showing that this is complete media fabrication. But the power of ghostwriting, like a manifesto, is like it creates a powerful illusion. When people are thinking that they're reading something from a certain author when it's not actually those authors' words. It's just it creates a powerful illusion. And, the Jesuits, as Alberto Rivera would say, the Jesuits like to be the intellectual element behind the scenes. And it provides in terms Sun Tzu, as Sun Tzu would write, it creates a brilliant cover to have your own ideologies being published through like Protestant or Jewish authors, like Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, like you were talking about a bit before we went live.
Well, of course, Alinsky's handler was Tom Godet, who got his undergrad degree from Boston College. And he actually was moved to Chicago, I guess. Godet moved to Chicago in the 1950s, and he
So
worked
George,
for.
can you repeat the name for the viewers? Tom Tom Goudet.
Godet. It's French. Gaudette. Yeah, and the butcher it'd be Godat, but the French would be Godet. And I'm sure you should be able to get that now.
That's great information. That should, and we were talking about how Saul Alinsky is used by like the Jesuit propaganda and the alternative media to drive up the conspiracy or the idea that there's like a Jewish conspiracy. When you see like his one of his main handlers was a Roman Catholic who went to Boston College.
Which is
Yeah,
almost.
I think personally, Saul Alinsky just is like an example of like a someone who had some of his works ghostwritten. I think he was another example of that.
Well, okay, if I could just mention something right now. We're talking about Morrison, Scott Morrison, the current PM of Australia, and I guess last week he got together with the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Now, it's interesting if you look at the background of Morrison, he seems certain generic Protestant. He grew up Presbyterian, he was baptized Presbyterian. His children go to a Baptist school, but he's a practicing Pentecostal, which is like, and I realize, people, change different church affiliations. So, and he seems to be even though he's a member of the,
He sounds very evangelical.
yes, like he's basically like an Australian version of Mike Pence, how or Sarah Palin. However, his deputy prime minister is Michael McCormick, and
Oh, that's a
yeah,
Catholic last name, Irish.
well, yes, the name, okay, Michael Francis McCormick. I repeat, Michael Francis McCormick. Okay, so and yes, so let's just look up. He went to early life. Okay, McCormick was born in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales, and was one of 5 children born to Lance McCormick and Ryland. Okay, getting to the. Okay, he attended St. Michael's Regional High School and Trinity Senior High School, later merged into Kildare Catholic College. So, see if this sounds familiar in light of what we were just talking about a moment ago. Okay, the front man, the Prime Minister of Australia, appears to be sort of generic Protestant, but his number two
Well, I
man
think
might
I
be.
have to Australia. Like, they must have had elections recently. I didn't tune into that just because the prime minister. Like when the video I did on Australia, I think was early 2018, and their PM was Malcolm Turnbull. He was, but
Yes,
Turnbull was a papist, but like they must have had their elections recently. But sorry, keep going, George.
well, yeah. So it was like 2018. So I guess Morrison just took over. He must have become prime minister this year. So anyhow, they got together. Morrison and Ardern got together, I guess, about a week or so ago, and they said they're going to crack down on social media in both their countries, um, YouTube, Facebook, those sort of things, to make sure that
Now,
these
just to
extreme.
clarify, is this kind of like a war on quote unquote fake news?
Well, not quite. It would be more like a war on hate speech. You know, they want to clamp down on so-called white supremacists, white nationalists, neo Nazis. In America, we say neo
Well,
conservatives.
I wonder if they will. I want because the victims of the shooting was a mosque. I wonder if they're gonna pass just because in the European Union. I thought just in terms on civil liberties, like like I just thought this was like very dangerous. But like they passed a law in the European Union where criticizing the Prophet Muhammad is now illegal,
Yes.
and like that just it's a dangerous line to start like making laws like that. Because
Hmm.
like they'll make another law where this thought is becomes illegal and this thought becomes illegal,
Hmm.
and then gradually like you're now in like a 1984 like dystopian, like 2 + 2 = 5, like there's no truth to be found. Eventually like you get to that point, but
And
I think that's probably like I think that's no just it's interesting that they're doing this over in Australia. Do you have more on what's going on over there, George?
I'm sorry.
I was saying, do you have more on what's going on? Like, I didn't
Well,
mean to cut
so
you off
there,
there.
okay, so I think I mentioned this on the show last week. So you had the event on March the 15th, the Ides of March. A week later, March the 22nd, 322, which is a big deal for skull, which is an important number for skull and bones for some reason. Um, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Ardern, said effective soon,
Well, I
we're
just
going to
a
be
quick
clamping.
a theory on why 322 might be important. I think 322 is when astrologically Aries is, or which in terms of like the annual zodiacal calendar. If you break the 12 months into the 12 houses, like
Mhm.
322 is like with like the first day of Aries in
Okay.
the calendar. I just that could be like a reason for it, and Aries is tied into like the god of Mars. Like in like the in the esoteric tradition, Mars is the god of war, for instance. But yeah, I
Okay.
just wanted to bring that up if people weren't aware of that. Could be. I think there's definitely a deeper meaning to the 322, but I think the Aries zodiac is one part of it.
Well, that's an important number for Skull and Bones and other esoteric societies, or Kabbalistic, well, esoteric Kabbalistic societies. Now, effective of the 12th of this month, today it's still April the 7th here. It's April the 8th in most of the world. So basically, in a few days, New Zealand is going to pass this massive anti-gun laws. No more automatic weapons. No, as Ardern said, no basically military-style weapons. And New Zealanders will have until September to comply with the law. Otherwise, they're looking at up to 7 years in prison and fines of thousands of dollars. So, what she basically now this I without talking specifically, I just like to make a general
I was saying
comment.
that's pretty fascist.
Well, yes. Now, how many times have things like this before happened? There's been an episode. whether you're talking Pearl Harbor, 9/11, the Gulf of Tonkin, where there was an event, alleged attack, bombing, shooting, whatever, and the government immediately reacted with some sort of draconian measures. The United States went to war with Japan after Pearl Harbor. The United States essentially went to war with North Vietnam after the Gulf of Tonkin. The American Air Force and Navy began bombing um, North Vietnam.
Oh, just recently, 9/11, they had a bill ready to get passed through the House, like a full bill legalizing the national security surveillance state, literally only 3 weeks after 9/11. I'm pretty sure even like puppets like I'm pretty sure Ron Paul has even admitted that the Patriot Act was written before 9/11 even happened. But but yeah, it was, and yeah, if you go into like yeah, who that's a yeah, when you like the quote unquote architect, was a professor at Jesuit Georgetown University of all places, devout Roman Catholic beat in. But that's probably like I would say to someone, if you're trying to wake someone up to like how this false flag stuff works, explain to them how like they literally had a full bill to legalize full on mass surveillance. You're talking about wiretaps, phone calls being monitored. Like it's come out full circle. The Guardian has done articles on this. Like the Verizon is all these companies. Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, they're all willingly giving all of your information to, the NSA, and it's all legal too. That's right. I guess that's the craziest part. But like, I think that's just a powerful example of because like there's no way if it was like a genuine response to like an actual attack that they would have a full bill ready to go in like 3 weeks.
And of course, they're basically, they fast tracked, the whole gun measure in New Zealand. So it's been almost overnight. And of course,
Yeah,
as I
it was
said,
just like this was like I'm pretty sure they did this in Connecticut, but like right after the Sandy hoax event, like it was the Jesuit trained governor, like literally the next day, calling for gun control. I
mhm.
think it'll be interesting to see if they do this in Christchurch, but they actually signed like a provision in Connecticut where like they officially closed like the Sandy Hook case. Like no one's allowed, like, you're not allowed to, like, or the files like aren't going to be reopened.
Well,
For instance, I wonder if they're going to like do that with this Christchurch case. What as soon like after they pass the legislation, of course. But I wonder if they're going to like seal it up.
well, it's funny you should say that. We were just talking a moment ago about J. Edgar Hoover, and I've been going through the archives of Mae Brussels, and I just want to say thank you for turning me on to her. Now, she, the shows aren't in order, so you might hear something from the late '80s or early '70s, and she's doing something from like 1971 or thereabouts. She was talking about then President Richard Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover when he was still the head of the FBI. Now, Brussels was speculating that in Hoover's last few years, he was, I'm not sure what exactly was going on. Maybe he was developing dementia or something like that. So there were, his controllers were saying, we're basically pushing him out of the way. He was just become, in his last 3 or 4 years, he was nothing more than just a figurehead. This is speculation according to Mae Brussels, based on things he'd read at the time, newspaper articles, because I guess he was outliving his usefulness. And there's some Brussels and actually Eric John Phelps speculated that he was actually maybe taken out. He was like poisoned somehow, which is I'm not sure why they would do that
Well,
because
possibly,
all they
maybe
had
they
to
viewed him
do.
as a liability, like some of like his cross dressing stuff and
Well, yeah, I mean,
his
the
activities.
people.
Like he was, I don't know. I've heard that Hoover was reportedly going to like nefarious like bohemian type of like sex parties and stuff. Like
Well, yes,
he lived a very like out there lifestyle that maybe they viewed was like a liability.
well, I mean, they could have just simply had him retire because he was relatively old. I mean, not old now, but old for back then. He was like 76, 77 when he died. And he was way beyond the mandated retirement age, which was like, I believe, 65. But because of all the files he had, he was able to hold on to his job longer than he should have. And so, are you saying that they decided to finally get rid of him because uh, maybe it would have leaked that his behavior, his alternative lifestyle, so to speak, would have leaked out? Is that what you're surmising?
I think it's possible. 'Cause, the Vatican, like they're super like anxious and like paranoid about like truths coming out about them in their press.
Mhm.
Like an example of
Well,
that was just when the Roman Catholic priest Stanislav Orlemansky went to visit Stalin in 1943, and he reported saying the Roman Catholics are being treated great here in Soviet Russia. Like they viewed that as really bad, but like Spellman was furious. Like Spellman had Orlemansky like banished to like a like a little monastery because like because Orlemansky's statements like, showed the whole racket of like the Vatican controlling both sides. Like while the Orthodox like, are being massacred in Soviet Russia, you have Orlemansky bragging how the Roman Catholic Church is being treated great. And like and if that Stalin was educated by the Jesuits, on top of that, it's just like that's why Spellman I think was furious because like if like the viewer of the story like knew like what if you're well versed in history you see right through the controlled like the control system basically for the
well,
overall the Vatican like, they're very conscious of like what's said in the press. And that's why like this is all the time like mainstream press organs like the New York Times and like Aver Manhattan has documented a lot of this like, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, a lot of them have like spinelessly like apologized to the Catholic Church after they run a story that criticizes them, for instance.
mhm. Or something else they'll do is they'll engage in controlled opposition. In that they appear to be criticizing the Catholic Church, but they're not, or maybe they're just criticizing certain elements of the church. For example, oh, I wasn't going to bring this up. I just last year I just saw the movie Spotlight, which was supposed to be the expose film about
Oh,
the
actually,
teaching.
I haven't seen the movie, but I went back and actually I read like the original Boston Globe Spotlight stories. So I'm somewhat familiar with the story, but sorry, keep going, George.
Okay, so what it was is the movie came out in 2015 and is about just for those who are not for those who don't know or who may know, but just there's a good reminder. The movie came out in 2015. It's about a series of articles the Boston Globe ran, I guess, like 2001, 2002, exposing the sex abuse scandals in the Boston, Massachusetts diocese. And the main figure involved with it was the late Archbishop Bernard Francis Cardinal, not Spellman, Law. Um, and the various priests have been abusing children in general and boys in particular since at least the 1960s. And how, for the most part, and I do, with a couple of exceptions, they did this with impunity for decades. What Law did is he transferred shuffled these priests from diocese to diocese in Massachusetts and across the country. And basically nothing happened to him. He
Yeah,
essentially,
another big pedophile, and I just have the Spotlight report open up here. Apparently, another his name was John J. Goigan or Gogan,
yes,
Geoghan. Yeah,
yes.
and yeah, he was like you said, like they moved this guy around like all over the place while they were aware of his record.
And he was like an accept. So I think he was just, they decided to, he was basically a sacrifice. They decided to burn one of the,
Did the movie go into like it says here like 130 people came forward? Like did the movie go into that many people? bringing up
Yes.
allegations. Okay, it went into yeah, it shows that this was a huge, systematic like thing that was happening here.
And I don't mean to belabor the point. And you're talking children in general and boys in particular, because something like 95% of the victims there and pretty much everywhere are boys. Because, and Catholics will quibble over this and they'll say, well, there may have been like 16 or 17, so technically speaking, they're minor. Well, yes, some of them were borderline adults, but many of them were prepubescent boys. So they like to muddy the waters.
Actually,
So
George, just recently, this came out like 2 weeks ago. You hear about the case in West Virginia? It's exactly what
I,
we were talking about here with Spotlight. You can keep going on the movie because this all ties in. But it says here the headline is from the Wall Street Journal. West Virginia Attorney General says Catholic diocese knowingly employed pedophiles.
yes.
So like, this is coming out, like everywhere. I think that, I think, like the Pope, he had that summit on pedophilia recently where he gave like no specifics on anything. It was like the most vague, like Jesuitical, like sophistry I've seen in a while. But
So
like these pedophilia scandals are literally blowing up all over. Like the Pennsylvania case has a potential to be like huge. Like I think there's, like from what I've read, they have like 500, like literally over 500 people claiming they were abused.
mhm.
Like it's hundreds of people. So like it could be uh like so huge, like the sky, like the scale of this or the size of the scandal that the Vatican won't be able to cover it up. I'm saying it's possible.
Okay.
Who knows?
Well,
At this rate, like there'll probably be like a scandal popping up in Oregon soon. There'll probably be a scandal popping up in New Mexico. Like I think we're gonna start seeing them pop up all over the.
or in our Ontario, Canada, or British Columbia, Canada.
Oh, everywhere.
Uh,
Actually, this was recently. This was I archived this. Where was this? This was a crazy scandal. Nuns. Um, nuns were like torturing children in Colombia recently.
well, yes, and there's one in New England, Vermont or New Hampshire. There's a story that came out in the mainstream media last year.
Oh,
Well,
that yeah, actually, but yeah, that was BuzzFeed. Yeah, that was yeah. The title of that story was "We saw nuns torture people. We saw nuns kill people." Actually,
okay.
yeah, and that was about yeah. Oh, that story was intense. Yeah, good. Thanks for bringing that up. People should look into that BuzzFeed story. Like that was some. Like, it was fully illustrated too, but like there was some intense stuff going on there. Like the kids were like, if I'm remembering, like the kids were literally like hurled to their death off like the third story of like the orphanage. Like this, sadistic stuff. And yeah, this case in Colombia, this was the Sun UK that covered this. It says here, sadistic nuns tortured 65 kids by burning their hands and shoving their heads down toilet bowls in care home.
Okay.
So like, really honestly, so, like this stuff is like it's coming out. I just think like like a headline that it's hard to do damage control on a story like that. So I mean, it's curious to see how the Jesuit media machine is going to spin this. And recently, you had George Cardinal Pell recently, was convicted. That was big news
Mhm.
over in Australia. I think he was given a very lenient 6 years, but maybe that's a sign for quote unquote progress that at least that they're not like completely untouchable. We'll have to see. Like, I don't know what facility Pell went to, but he's absolutely, not going to the county jail. That's for
Well,
sure.
you see, there's locally in my diocese, Santa Rosa. I guess it was a few months ago. The Bishop Robert Vassa, I guess, gave a press conference on the history of sex abuse in the diocese, which the Santa Rosa, California diocese goes back to early 1960s. It was part of I believe, the Sacramento, California diocese. And he made a press conference and released the names of dozens of priests going back 50 plus years who had been accused of some sort of impropriety. And he said, fortunately or unfortunately, something like two-thirds of them have died. Most of them are no longer in the diocese. And now, just to clarify something, Vasa, even though I guess he's what they call a secular or a diocesan bishop, he went to St. Gregory Pontifical Academy in Rome. Or I was yes, St. Gregory Pontifical. He got a law degree. He got a degree in canon law from there. So the current, I've mentioned this on the show before, but just as a reminder, the current district attorney for Sonoma County is Jill Ravik. She got her law degree from the University of San Francisco. She's one of at least three district attorneys in this county who got their degrees from that institution.
What did you actually
So,
do? Interesting, an interesting dynamic. Just you bring that up. I'm pretty sure there's also a pedophilia case going on in Illinois right now.
well, there's probably several.
And the DA though out there is Jesuit trained,
Mhm.
Lisa Madigan. So
Yeah,
it's
yes.
interesting to see if they're kind of let off the hook in some sense with the fact that there's a Jesuit trained DA there. And just
Well,
a story here that I put this on my archive page. I don't know if you saw this. This was done by the Chicago Tribune. This was called just Chicago Jesuits Hid Sex Crime. I recommend this came out in 2013. I recommend people check it out. Yeah, the pedophile here. What? Let me see what the guy's name is. Yeah, the father Donald McGuire S.J. was this Jesuit priest that was shuffled around all over the place. And actually, just recently, Georgia, this was like all the big like CIA outlets, like the New York Times, the Washington Compost. I like calling it the Washington Compost. Jeff Bezos literally owns the Washington Post and has a $600 million deal with the CIA. It's a joke, but but like all these big media, I think this was the northeastern province, George, of the Jesuits. They released a list of like 60 priests accused of pedophilia, something
well,
like that. Maybe the Jesuits are trying to like get ahead of the curve and say, "Oh, look, we're being so transparent. Like we're trying to change and do the right thing." Maybe I actually think they're probably going to go that route. They're going to say, "Look, we're being so transparent here. Look, we're trying to solve the problem." Blah 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 blah.
well, I've never taken martial arts, but I believe there's a type of martial arts called jujitsu, and I guess one of the key defenses. I'm just using this as an analogy, but one of the things you learn in jujitsu is how to take a hit, how to take a blow, and because if somebody's attacking you, if he's going to hit you with a fist, you want to get as close to him as possible, and distance between because if you're several feet apart and if he hits you in the nose or the face, he's going to do more damage. But if you're as close as possible, you're going to minimize the damage. So you want to lessen the shock. So this could be a case of jujitsu, so to speak. You want to go into the blow. Did you catch that?
I like that analogy.
Or another way of doing it, if you're surfing, I've never been a surfer, but I've heard people say that if you're out in the ocean or something, um, I guess it would be hard for you to do where you are. But if you ever went down to Florida or something, you might be able to do it. But if you're coming to a massive wave, like like a 10-foot high wave or taller, 3 meters, whatever that is, you want to go into the wave if you know it's going to take you out. Yes, it'll take you out, but won't do as much damage if you're trying to get away from it. So it's
Yeah,
just
that's exactly that's another good analogy. That's what they're trying to do. Saying that, oh look, we're going right into the heart of the problem here. We held a commission, like we're releasing lists, like blah 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 blah.
well, okay. Well,
Even like
speak.
even with they'll even with like we can tie this into Spotlight, but I'm sure the Vatican, through their Hollywood is like their prostituted uh, brainwashing outlet. But like through Hollywood, like they can say, oh, like like Spotlight, Hollywood even has like transparency now because like there's a movie out there that's so. quote unquote criticizing the Catholic Church.
Okay, you want to talk about propaganda and co-opting Hollywood? There's a TV series on right now on NBC here in America called FBI. It's been on for 2 or 3 years, but it's a reboot of an earlier series that ran from 1965 to 74. The main star of that series, and I know there's an awkward segue, Eric. The main star of that series was F. Zimbalist Jr. And so this show ran, as I said, from 65 to 64, or 65 to 1974, when J. Edgar Hoover was still alive. And
He was given his sword of Ignatius Loyola in '64.
yes,
So yeah,
so
right after, yeah, so the show was created in six. Yeah, well, interesting. That could have been it was probably just Jesuit theater propping up
well,
Hoover's career and serving
well,
the Jesuits.
you said probably. Well, okay, one of the co-stars, I mentioned F. Zimbalist Jr., who was the father of Stephanie Zimbalist. Well, one of the co-stars of the show was Philip Abbott. I don't remember him. He lived from 1924 to 1998. Abbott got his undergrad degree from Fordham. Um,
Well, that's a red flag.
he, well, here's another one. He is buried, as I said, he died in 1998. He was buried in Roman Catholic San Fernando Mission Cemetery in Los Angeles. So, from cradle to grave, he was a devout Roman Catholic. So he was the number two man on the show. So you could say now, Evelyn Ziblas Jr. was Jewish. So even in a fictional series, they always had to have like a non-Catholic front man, preferably Jewish. But you actually have the number two man who's actually pulling the strings.
Oh, actually, I forget this actress's name. There's a great example of this in the book Hollywood Censor, the book on Joseph Breen. Oh, what was her lady's name? I'm probably botching it, but it was like Alicia Bergman or something like that.
Mhm.
It's in the book, but like it's there, like it's 100% there. If the viewer wants to check this out, read the book Hollywood Censor. It's on my archive page. But like they used this Jewish actress in a movie about like the Virgin Mary to play like the Virgin, and like it was used as propaganda. Say, oh, like the Jews are controlling Hollywood. Like they got like the biggest roles, like like I'm just as you like, just as you point out, the Jesuits love to put like a Jew, in a show that stacks with like Roman Catholics around them to create like the perfect illusion that like the Jews are like the ones pulling the strings.
Well, and of course, the show, the original FBI was a Quinn Martian production. He later go on to make several other series, Streets of San
Well, actually,
Francisco,
George,
and
do you know if I'm sure you can get a torrent, but do you know if this like show can you find episodes of the show online? It sounds like pretty entertaining Jesuit theater.
well, I suppose I can get back to you on that. I'll send you something if I can find something.
Or because it
Well,
just recently, like I recently watched the 1973 Exorcist movie because the guy who like wrote the script, William Blatty, was trained by the Jesuits at Brooklyn Prep in Georgetown, and even like joined the U.S. Psychological Warfare Division in Vietnam. Like there was like there was like four Jesuit priests who actually like were producers of the movie. But like I don't like I thought I got a kick out of watching it just because of just knowing of like how blatantly the Jesuits were trying to like create like a panic, like I guess create like a satanic panic with like the Exorcist movie and to like terrify everyone of like all things like occult and stuff like that. I don't know, it was pretty entertaining, and like how like the priest, like they showed the priests, that's another big part of like the Exorcist propaganda. All Exorcist propaganda is to show the priests as like these like godly saints who are here to drive out the devils who are trying to subvert like the church and like the
oh,
church's true doctrine.
okay. Couple of things, Eric. I just mentioned Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. He was of a Jewish background, but he ended up converting to the Episcopal Church, which is uh, the American version of the Anglican Church. And as I said, the producer of the show was Quinn Martin, who have later gone to make several other series in the 1970s. Barnaby Jones, Cannon, The Streets of San Francisco. These might sound like obscure programs, but I remember watching them as a kid and sort of quickly reruns. Well, anyhow, uh, Quinn Martin, like Zimbalist, was actually of a nominally Jewish background, but there's a Quinn Martin school at the University of Santa Clara. That's what they call their drama school at the University of Santa Clara.
Oh, there you go. So he was honored by them, at one of their schools, showing that he was subservient. No, like,
Yes.
I noticed that happens quite a bit. Like if they, sometimes people who aren't educated by the Jesuits who are like still working for them, they'll get like like a hall or like a school or like something named after them. At like recently, Denzel Washington is like now part of like the Jesuit Fordham like acting school. He's doing work like in the faculty even, and he co-sponsored another Jesuit alumni actresses like endowment program at Fordham also. Yeah, but Denzel is another good. Like, he's getting very involved in Jesuit schools. But great information on this. Can you just repeat the name for the viewers, George, of those two, or the
Okay.
actor and the director?
Okay, if you can't get the name of this, look up the original FBI, 1965-74. The main star was Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Can you just pull it up and maybe you can put it in the show notes? I
Oh,
mentioned Quinn
sorry, actually,
Martin was
my mic was muted. Yeah, I'll do that right now. Actually, I'll put FBI show. Put that in the link or the live stream link. Okay, I
well.
got it right here.
As I said, there's a reboot. It's been on for 2 or 3 years called the new. Well, they don't call it the
Well,
new
George,
FBI.
the show was officially sponsored by Ford. That's funny.
Okay, and of
And
course,
like they got it. They're telling you right in your face. Yeah, this is brought to you by corporate propaganda. Also, keep going, George. That's
well, well, I'd like to do a specific presentation on Robert McNamara, who was noted for several things. He was a so-called Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and later Lyndon Johnson from 61 to 68. When I say so-called, I think it should actually be called the U.S. Department of Papal Proxy Crusades. It used to be called the U.S. Department of War, which was a little bit more accurate. But anyhow, McNamara, as I said, was an executive at Ford Motor Company. Um, and as I said,
well, George.
I'm going to.
Wait, I just missed that. I was copying the link, and you mentioned that McNamara was working in. Was he working in Stimson's War Office?
Well, no. He actually was during World War II, or the final phase of the Second 30 Years' War. Um, he was in he was in the U.S. Army Air Corps, which later became the Air Force, and I believe he was a subordinate to Curtis LeMay, first in Europe and then in Japan.
No, interesting. McNamara. He has. I got to do more research on him too, but he's very connected. I'm pretty sure he had an appointment at the World Bank. I'm
Okay,
pretty. He was a director at the World Bank even at one point, which like John J. McCloy was. McNamara, like McCloy, was a high level conspirator. But like, interesting with McNamara, George, it was under his like guidance that the Defense Intelligence Agency was created.
yes.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
so yes, and like I think I brought up, like the first director that McNamara chose was Jesuit trained devout Catholic General Joseph Francis Carroll, which I don't think is a coincidence.
Well,
I think that's probably the intellectual uh the intellectual craftiness of the Jesuit priest behind McNamara is probably the reason that selection occurred.
okay, could go back to something we were discussing a few minutes ago. I brought up something that Ray Russell brought up about J. Edgar Hoover, that in the last few years of his life, he was being nudged out. He wasn't in the loop. I guess his handler said, "Hey, Edgar, uh, we we don't want to tell you what's going on because it's on a need to know basis." Uh, and I guess there were, I know he's a wicked man, but they're just being flat out mean to him. They said, you know what, uh, you're outliving your usefulness. You just simply make all we're having you do for us. And I'm paraphrasing. All you're good for is you're just simply the front man. You give the press releases, the press conferences, and you can go in front of the cameras, but you're not in charge. And
Well, they absolutely make that point to all of the their duped conspirators like who willingly follow like the Jesuits' agenda. They tell them that if you don't like we're the real. Actually, George, this was in the memoirs of Joseph Rettinger. This was in the page range 100 to 125. This is in the book Memoirs of Eminence Grise. But it was a quote. Joseph Rettinger was or he said of Winston Churchill. It was a quote where Winston Churchill said, "I would never dream of being in your realm of politics." To the Jesuit Joseph Rettinger, and
okay,
that's literally what you just stated. Like that there's there's a different level of like the deep state intrigue, which the Jesuit priest is at the center of. Winston Churchill said to Joseph Rettinger, "I wouldn't." Rettinger is the Jesuit who created the Bilderberg Group and the Council of Europe, the official predecessor to the EU, like a man of real power. But Winston Churchill said, "I wouldn't dream of being in your realm of politics."
okay.
I thought that was a crazy admission.
Well, thing is with Hoover, I'm having a hard time following this because for most of his career, most of the time that he was the director of the FBI, I thought he was more of a hands-on kind of a fellow, and that he knew what was going on. But it seems as if that last maybe 4 or 5 years of his life, 3 or so, that he was not in the loop. Um, they said,
well,
his
maybe his Hoover had his Jesuit mentor was Robert S. Lloyd, who passed away before him. So maybe Hoover was lost without his Jesuit best friend. That's also a possibility.
okay.
Hoover gave the Jesuit like a chalice on behalf of the FBI.
Okay, and maybe
Like they went, like they were personal friends like for like over 30 years. Even I'm pretty sure. Like the Jesuit Lloyd like spoke at like 43 consecutive or 34 consecutive FBI and National Academy meetings. It's kind of like an unprecedented like close relationship between like a Jesuit and the FBI. So the FBI and the Catholic Church. I'm holding my physical copy right now. But it says in this book that Lloyd was like the unofficial chaplain to the FBI. So possibly, Hoover, felt a little lost without him. I think it's just possible because, like the conspirators to the Jesuits, like literally, duped themselves into like submitting like all of their willpower to like their Jesuit superiors, and like they become lost without like the instruction given to them. I think that's part of it. Like this, Theodore Greisinger touched on this. In particular, just for a source, was King John III of Portugal, and he historically was just absolutely controlled, like mentally, like spiritually, and even like physically by his Jesuit confessors. Theodore Greisinger, like he says, like the control the Jesuits had on him was so severe that like he wouldn't do anything without his advice of his Jesuit mentors.
okay,
So, like,
this
it's
is
a real, and you have to think too, like especially like just especially the Catholic angle. You know, being a Catholic, like the confessional is like the most sacred thing and like one of the most sacred things in the Catholic Church. Like you have to tell your priest everything in the confessional.
Mhm.
You know,
And
and it's a brilliant way, you know, for the Jesuits, you know, to take, you know, full control, to like learn all of the given person's weaknesses, um, you know, all their vulnerabilities, you know, what makes them tick, and then, you know, it's just a way, you know, for the Jesuits to further like manipulate someone when you know all the inner secrets of their life.
okay, and this is just more of a cultural observation. In that J. Edgar Hoover took over the FBI in 1924, and he ran until 1972, so almost half a century. And the world changed quite a bit from the beginning until the end. And he had a number of quirks, to say the least. He made no pretense about being a heterosexual. They didn't even arrange a sham marriage for him. You know, he was a homosexual, a cross-dresser. His main partner was Clyde Tolson, but they didn't even
Oh,
make the
Tolson was his lover. Wow. Yeah,
well,
I haven't
yeah,
done it. I got to do more research into like the cross dressing homosexual side of Hoover, because that probably, you know,
okay.
shows more of his you know, his quirkiness in general. But, you know, with the Tolson was just a devout Catholic. He wasn't trained by the Jesuits, was he? He was like just a devout Catholic.
I did not know that. However,
I
one
didn't
of the things,
yeah, because he is, yeah, because he's mentioned in the FBI and the Catholic Church as being like part of the Catholic like all guard, like or like the Catholic um like he talks about how like Hoover like associated himself like predominantly with Catholics like in the agency. And the author mentions Tolson as one of those names. I just wanted to bring that up if you didn't know that.
well, okay, it's somewhat ironic that the FBI had a reputation for being cutting edge. This is something I read from other sources, and in that they wanted to be one of the avant-garde law enforcement agencies in the world in terms of anything that was novel, they embraced it. Anything that was ahead of the curve, they embraced it. For example, they're one of the first law enforcement agencies to use computers. Uh, for example, to also use psychological profiling to look for bad guys. However, even though they were often innovative, they were somewhat out of date in a number of things. One of the criticisms of Hoover is that he seemed to be stuck, you know, mentally in the 1920s, you know, near the end, in that they had these draconian policies like the agents had to be clean cut, short hair, have short hair, no minorities, no women, other than in clerical positions, and uh, and so when he died, a whole new era started a whole new era for the FBI. They finally entered into the 1970s. But that's besides the point. Now, if I could just mention something that may seem completely off topic, I was watching a video a few days ago by Paul Joseph Watson, and yes, I know he's a shill. He's been on the Alex Jones / Bill Hicks show, but I still like watching him just for entertainment value. One of the things he did a video on the depth of Western civilization.
Oh, sorry, George. I was looking through my. I'm going to share an interesting declassified FBI file I found in the Krunislav Draganovich files. Who was this? I didn't catch the name there of the guy. You said this guy was connected to Alex Jones.
Oh yeah, I mean Paul Joseph Watson, he's British, and yes, I know he's a controlled opposition show. Okay, yeah, yeah, but I still like watching Mark Dice videos because even though I know this and been on the Alex Jones show / Bill Hicks, I just do it for entertainment. But getting to my point, according to Watson, has Western civilization died? Because if you look about almost everything that has come out in the 21st century, whether you talk about movies, TV shows, music, almost all of it, well, in terms of movies, almost everything that's out today are remakes, reboots, prequels.
Yeah, like just the show Fuller House. That's just a reboot off Full House, right, from the 70s. Yeah, I noticed
Oh,
that though. I noticed that though. Like, it's a good point. Like, tons of our quote unquote pop culture is just rebooted from like shows from the 70s and the 60s. Maybe
oh,
like they're running out of ideas on how to like dupe and dumb down the public. Possible.
well, and of course, yeah, let's talk about movies. I mean, everything, as I said, as I said, is a remake. Is the backstory, the side story of the franchise. Like how many spin-offs have there been of the whole Star Wars franchise? What, 10, 12? You have 8 or 9 films in the canon, but you have several side stories. Um, so there've been something like a dozen or so. I mean, how many
Well, so
Spider-Man?
they'll probably make more. Like they keep making like tons of money, so they're probably just gonna keep making more and more Star Wars films. I can't see them stopping. It's because it's a cash cow. At this point.
Well,
Even if
as I
the
said,
movie, like people like I know like the hardcore Star Wars fans are like complaining that like the quality of the movies have gone down. Like even if the movies become like a joke, like people are still gonna watch it for like the brand recognition itself.
okay, and if you want to talk about music, my gym, almost everything they play there was, they play pop, folk songs, rock and roll. Almost everything they play there came out before the year 1990. And so most of it is like 1960s, 1970s. And it seems like for the most part, they stopped. Okay, people might argue that there's no such thing as a good pop song. But according to this Watson video, there's a school in Spain, I forgot which one, they did a survey. They did an analysis of songs that had come out over the previous 50 years, i.e., from 1962 to 2012. And in each year, the songs get worse and worse in terms by every metrics. They look at the lyrics, they look at the beats, they look at the
Oh, I believe
and
it. It's true.
they just
Like
get
just casually,
bigger.
like I pretty much only listen to rap music. Like rap music as a genre has been on like the sharp decline since the 1990s. Like sharp.
Okay,
Like
look.
I don't even like want to like affiliate myself with the mainstream rap music anymore. Like it's embarrassing, really.
Okay, and this
Like
is
and
literal.
it's used like at this point like most people think like that there's nothing intellectual about rap music because of like the crap that is like infested like the airwaves. And just on some of these, like literally, like Lil Pump videos have like 150 million views, 200 million views, 200 like it's I don't, like, it's just madness. Like there's a rapper called Lil Georgie. You'll probably laugh at this because you I don't know like this is the Jesuits though like creating this confusion. There's a rapper called Lil Xan named after the Xanax pill.
Okay.
Literally, like you can't even understand what he's saying. He, he doesn't even speak English. Like he's just like humming on the beat. But George, his views is like his videos on YouTube have like 200 million views. Like
And of
200,
course,
like it's crazy. Like so, I think that the Jesuits are trying hard to get people distracted with just mindless garbage. Like they'll go to any extent.
okay, I've never been a big fan of rap. I'm sorry, Eric, or hip hop, whatever they call it. But I'm vaguely familiar with some of the tunes, like NWA. Anyway, so I can remember when they were together, like Two Live Crew,
Actually, just
and
NWA. Those guys were, I think, provocateurs. Well, I think you
yes.
mentioned this in private. Like you're hip to the idea of the CIA creating gangster rap music
Oh,
to further to further violence, and this goes into like some of Gary Webb's reporting. It goes hand
well,
in
of course.
hand of keeping the drug trade. Having rappers promoting the drug trade, is good for business, really.
Well, of course, if you think about NWA's signature song, "F the Police," if you analyze the lyrics, they're talking about having a shootout with the cops. If I'm paraphrasing, they're um, for those who aren't familiar with the song, it came out in the '80s. and it featured this band NWA. That ends with that attitude, and the this scenario is they're in court and they're trying. These are these poor young black teenage kids who are being harassed, constantly being harassed by the cops, and so they decided to place the cops
Well, just
in
in
front.
Emmanuel Josephson's book, like he goes into how the Jesuits like are the fabricators of the whole, the blowing out of proportions the idea that the blacks are being like unfairly persecuted and discriminated against. Creating
Okay,
like social justice warriors for racism. Just thinly veiled as like in reality, it's like he goes into like the communist nature of a lot of these or the subversive organized nature of a lot of these agitators as well.
okay, but as vulgar as the song is, with all the obscenity, I mean, at least there's a modicum of musicality of it. I mean, it's somewhat poetic. It
Yeah,
rhymes.
it is like a sonic sounding song. Well, I'm saying I bring that up because that song I think was made to just as a kind of like a agitative device to create like more division on the streets between
Yeah.
the police and black people, and eventually like what it is like getting us serfs like to fight each other rather than intellectually come together and
Okay. So
defeat our enemies. But like for example,
okay.
like
So,
you mentioned that earlier on, like the Black Panthers propaganda. The Black Panther propaganda was very similar. The Black Panther propaganda was essentially like "f the police." Like they had police officers depicted as pigs that were shown to them on the lead of the Jesuits, for instance. But like it's very similar on like just I just bring up that Black Panther case at the Catholic Church because it's almost like the same narrative to that NWA song. It's all to like inflame people's emotions, creating like the police as the scapegoat. Like when the police are in like a compartmentalized hierarchy, most policemen like I don't want to be harsh, but like they're useful idiots for the control system. Like they don't really know anything. They're just working their 9 to 5 job. You know what I
and
mean?
of course, as we've discussed before, is at least if you're talking about a medium or large size department, unless you're completely corrupt and controlled, like you're a Freemason or you're willing to murder people or plant evidence, you're not going to get very far. In most agencies, if you're semi-decent, you might make sergeant. You might get your 20 years, but you're not going to make officer. You're
Yeah,
not going to make
you'll become a sergeant in 25 years. Yeah,
and
it'll take time if you're honest.
but if you're corrupt, if you're willing to take bribes, if you're willing to murder people, beat people up, you'll make rank just like that. You'll become the chief of the police.
Well, absolutely, and I
And
think it's the I don't know, a lot of cops. Just an example of this was the officer Tippit being killed in the Kennedy assassination. G. Gordon Liddy was Jesuit trained. G. Gordon Liddy is actually reported to have wanted to kill Tippit, but the cops once you join that organization, if you learn too much, as like an underling, like Tippit did in that case, like you're gonna go.
oh, thank
And just
you.
I just bring that up because I don't a lot of just police officers don't realize like they're I guess the subversive nature of it's a compartmentalized hierarchy, and just like, there's lots of cases where people at the lower levels find out things they're not supposed to know, and then it becomes a liability.
So they might accidentally catch a bullet. Um,
Absolutely.
well,
Yeah. Well,
well,
recently,
something.
I know this was a case Johnny brings up with NASA. It is you. I don't know if I just forget this guy's name. You might know what I'm talking about, George. But there was that NASA engineer who kind of um, you know I forget what the signal he made. He gave like a signal to the moon like the moon landing not being real. What was the signal he gave? You know what I'm talking about?
Are you
The,
talking
the,
about Michael
not,
Collins?
wait, who? What was his name?
Was it Michael Collins?
Michael Collins. Yeah, like he was either he like died in a fire supposedly. That was like the official story.
I had to go
NASA.
look that.
Yeah, I've heard Johnny bring that up, but that was a case where I think that was like an accelerated suicide or like an artificial suicide. I think they killed him
Oh,
for leaking stuff. Well, another I know this like I know the name here. Tim Russert had a really accelerated death after, and Tim Russert he was affiliated with like three Jesuit schools, so like they'll take out one of their own fellow conspirators operating at a lower level if they get out of line. Russert, after he did the Skull and Bones interviews with Bush and Kerry, and Tim Russert made he said, "Oh, the conspiracy theorists are going to go crazy with this one. You guys are being so secretive." Like he was literally dead. I think 4 years after that.
oh, okay. You're talking about making ranks and being corrupt and being controlled. Um, last was it October or so? You're talking about 6 months ago. There was supposed to have been a shooting in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I brought this up the show. The sheriff of Allegheny County is William Byrne, who went to University of Dayton, and he also went to Catholic High School in Pittsburgh. However, something I didn't find out until actually today, the commissioner of the Pennsylvania State Police is Robert um, uh, Robert Evanchik, and I looked at his education, and as they have a look on the PA on the PA police website. They have a little bio of him, uh, and I couldn't find anything incriminating about him until I got to the very last line. And I think I sent you this. He So it talks about where he went to school and his training, all that sort of stuff. He's a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Association of Fraternal Affairs, and the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 43. Did you catch that?
That's Masonic, the last one.
Yes.
And I've seen photos of Freemason, the square and compass on like 15 different police department logos in the states.
Mhm.
So it's very intriguing to say the least.
So if you're gonna
And
have,
the police and I think there's over in Wales, like for the Catholics, like there's all sorts of that's a way to control the police is to get them to take oaths and become subservient to third party organizations. But in Wales, there's the Catholic what was it the Catholic Police Guild. That's what it's called. Yeah, I recommend if you type that people should type that in Catholic Police Guild. But it's crazy. Like out in Wales, like all the highest level Catholic, like they see like they have like annual conferences with the Archbishop. Like it's literally in your face that like we're enforcing like the Inquisition. Or like toned down, like we're enforcing canon law.
and
And that's also
as I
at
said,
this point where I live here, like they even slap like a Roman laurel wreath on all the police cars, for instance. I think just telling you, like, if you have the eyes to see, like, yeah, like, we're serving the Pope, like, we're serving the Catholic Church. Like, in terms of like my area, Niagara Falls, like, there's by far the most churches here are Catholic churches. During the latest elections at the local level, 6 of the candidates had Roman Catholic, like Italian names. Yeah, for instance. Um, so yeah, like they control like the whole that's why people mock like the statement in the Bible, but like the just if you're well studied on world events, like the horror of Babylon becomes like an accurate like description just for all of their activities. Like they've literally
well,
empowered like and enabled like over 300 dictatorships. That's probably a low number. Just in like since like 1900, they've probably enabled, empowered, and embedded with 50 dictatorships around the world. like
Wow.
ruthless fascist dictatorship. Like
Okay.
not once did they like Hitler announced himself as a proudly as a Roman Catholic in the Germany's who's who. Not one condemnation. Hitler was never excommunicated. Like, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like, I guess people fall for the idea of this. The apologist lines are just, I guess, really effective. Of like, oh, you're a hater if you speak out against the Catholics. You're a bigot. Like, you're just a hater. You're just a hate-filled person.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like
Eric,
it's effective. Sorry, keep going.
okay. I didn't. I normally will send you something, the things I'd like to discuss on the show, but I don't mean to throw you a curveball. But there's something that's been in the hopper in a while, so I'd just like to share something with you. I there's a there's supposed to be a Protestant school in Phoenix, Arizona called Grand Canyon University. It was founded in the 1940s by the Southern Baptist Convention, but around the year 2000, it became non-denominational or interdenominational. And as I said, this is supposed to be a Protestant school. So you'd assume the people going there would be learning Protestant theology. And maybe yes, maybe no. But if I could, and I think I've sent you this, but this is a partial list of the faculty at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona.
Just to clarify, this is a quote Protestant institution.
Yes, in Arizona. It's called Grand Canyon University. Um, I didn't write down their departments. John Lowry, Masters Villanova. Pam Linus, St. Mary's University, JD. Ling Yin, Regis, MBA. Winching Lau Duffy, St. Mary's University undergraduate degree. Susan Lewis, Nursing, Duquesne. Demonte Leary, JD and MBA from St. Thomas University in Florida. Victor Landry, MS Duquesne. Kimberly Belcher, undergrad, Notre Dame. Robert Lambert, Regis MBA. Beatrice Capos, BA Notre Dame College, Ohio. Mark Koenig, Seattle University law degree. These are Stan Klatchka, Masters, Dominican University, San Rafael, California. Monica Kidder, the Masters Regis, Denver, Colorado. Dolores Kelly, St. Joseph University Masters. Brian Kelly, Seton Hall, PhD. John Kelmeyer, LaSalle Masters. Perry Katz, PhD, Loyola, Chicago. Tom Joseph, Master's Theology, Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio, Texas. Keisha Jones, Master's at St. John's University. Charlotte Johnson, Bachelor of Science, DePaul.
Jeez, are there any non-Catholic trained faculty?
A few.
I'm saying like, you have to be up to like that's incredible. Like, you have to be up to like 25 names. Though.
Okay. Patrick Johnson, Master's, Loyola, Louisiana. I'm sorry, Loyola, Los
And
Angeles.
just for the viewer, all these Catholic professors are teaching at a non-Catholic school.
Yeah,
Just for
yes,
just for some clarification.
yes. Renee Arizari, MBA, St. John's University. Greg Johnson, PhD, Master's in Theology from Notre Dame. Michael Horton, Master's, University of St. Joseph's.
Oh, that's good. Wow, that's crazy.
Brian Harding.
That should show people that there is like an absolute like agenda to pacify Protestant churches,
And that's not the
Protestant
complete.
education as well. I'm sure that's a big part of it too. Is the whitewash, the history of the Reformation.
And
Uh, that's a big and to get people to forget ultimately like the even like I've most people don't even know what the Reformation I would say is in America and Canada today. Like if you asked, you did a survey, walked on the street, tell me a bit about the Reformation, most people would be, what? What are you talking about?
Oh, okay.
That's fascinating, George. Just wow, I'm just
Okay.
that's
Just a few more.
that's just incredible. Like that has so that an average university only has like 80 faculty members. Like it's not a crazy amount. This doesn't sound like that big of a school either, I assume, right?
Oh, and that's at the okay. Just a few more. Okay, I know I'm going to go a little over. Tanisha Guy, PhD, St. Mary's. Scott Greenberger, Master, St. John's College. Donna Graham, Masters, Villanova. Theo Goodwin, Regis, Masters at Regis. Matt Gonzalez, Masters, St. Mary's College. Terry Gilmore, St. Catherine's University of Minnesota. Brian Gill, Masters, DePaul. Daniel Guyvet, Masters, Rockhurst, Jesuit. Um, okay, and then there are more.
You're probably half of these schools you've named are Jesuit schools.
And
That's crazy. The Catholic Church takeover of America is just getting frightening. Because I was reading a merger watch report, and there's now like 50 cities in the United States where the only hospital is a Catholic hospital.
Mhm. Well,
That should genuinely scare people, I think.
okay. Have you ever heard of a book, a little pamphlet called Confessions of a Medical Heretic?
Oh, I have. That's a fantastic by Robert Mendelsohn. Yeah, that's fantastic. He compares like the whole process of going into the doctor, like seeing the priest in the confessional, and he exposes the whole racket of like the doping up of. He actually, I'm pretty sure in the book, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along the lines that like the drugging of children is like the new like modern Inquisition.
And he said this back in the
He said
19
something along the lines like that.
okay. He said this back in the 1970s. He was a Jewish doctor, but he was honest. I mean, there have been a few honest Jews here, that, like me in Brussels. Um, and
Well,
he was
I think that may be part of the Jesuit anti-Semitism. I just noticed that there's been a lot of the some of the best information, I think exposing the system has come from Jews, and that maybe that's.
and so what is basically. I just read it a few days ago. The book Confessions of a Medical Heretic, and it came out in 1979, 40 years ago. But it's uncanny how applicable it still is till now, and things have only gotten worse. And one of the things he said in the intro to the book was, if you look at any town across America of any size, it'll have at least one Catholic. It'll have at least one hospital, and if it's a medium-sized town, it'll usually have several. This is not necessarily a good thing. It is not for the benefit of the public. And even one of the things that Middleton applied, even in non-Catholic institutions, the Catholics control them through board of directors, trustees,
Oh,
donations.
absolutely, yeah. That's another huge rabbit hole people can go down. It's literally just like the Jesuit. Like you see the same connections on Catholic hospitals that you see on like the Jesuit universities. CEOs of banks, presidents of steel corporations, members of like the Federal Reserve Board. Like, yeah, a great point though, George. People should look into you'll see that the Jesuits control your local secular hospital wherever you are.
And we've already talked about education. There's just like, and I live in Catawba, California, which is in Sonoma County. And something I've discussed before is how much control Rome has of where I live. You know, the community college, the state college, uh,
Yeah, but like
private.
you mentioned, I think we mentioned before the Empire College and the community college, and just
Yeah,
that laundry list you're going through, George. There, the huge list of those Jesuit trained teachers. What was the name of that Protestant school?
Grand Canyon University is in Phoenix, Arizona.
Grand
And
Canyon.
like
Okay,
I
so
said,
I recommend people. I'm sure like was that list like just on their website of faculty members, like all that. A lot of times this information, is widely accessible just on like the websites of these places.
And then,
I recommend people check out that school because that's like in your face insurgency, like over the top.
last year I did a report on Wheaton College, Illinois, which is just north of or outside Chicago, and it's almost the same situation. You're talking like a fourth of the instructors there and professors are Catholic. Have gone to at least one Catholic school, and usually SJ. And there is you're right there. You have Loyola Chicago, you have DePaul, you're fairly close to Marquette, and of course you have Notre Dame right there. So it's even the control there is even more obvious. But if you look at almost any of these so-called Protestant schools, the aforementioned Grand Canyon U, Wheaton College in Chicago, Gordon Conwell, the main campus or the original one is in Massachusetts. It's the same situation. And they don't, Rome doesn't need to control every position. They just need to control the important ones, like the chairs of the departments, things like that, that determine who gets hired, what books they use, what materials they use, who comes in and
Well, the
speaks.
current Secretary of Education nationwide, Betsy DeVos, devout Roman Catholic, the sister of Knight of Malta, Eric Prince, whose current company, Frontier Services Group, is the biggest private paramilitary company in China.
Ah,
And actually, Eric Prince's company is doing some. Well, the Washington Post reported this. So I always take what they say now with a grain of salt. But apparently, Eric Prince's quote facility is like quote rehabilitating like thousands of Muslims in Russia or in China. But I think if they're doing anything with the Muslims, Prince's Frontier Services Group are probably radicalizing them, if
ah,
anything.
and,
And
yeah,
George, I just wanted to bring this up. I was going to mention this earlier, but this was just a really interesting declassified file I found from the FBI, and this just kind of shows like the nefarious intrigue of just like I guess the Catholic machine in general. But like, are you aware of the Krunislav Draganovich?
I'm sorry,
The
what was the name?
Krunislav Draganovich. He
I'm
was
not.
he was a Jesuit trained Eustachi who he actually I recommend like there's actually this is a treasure trove of information. Type in his name is spelled Krunoslav, first name Krunislav Dragonovich, Draganovic, yeah, Draganovic. He was a Croatian Catholic Ustashi, but like this was and like it actually like the CIA, the FBI, and the OSS, State Department, like in their detailed reports in their own documents disclose how Draganovich smuggled thousands of or hundreds and like literally thousands of Nazis out of Europe using actually something like a monastery called the Saint Jerome Monastery in Rome. It was a Dominican cloister, for instance. But
Oh,
this came out like all this can be seen. Like there's literally pages and pages of documents. Type in, go to the CIA reading room, uh, Freedom of Information Act. It's widely available. Type in Krunislav Draganovich in the search bar, and all this will come up. But this in particular document, there's literally like 95 of them, George. Like I want to say, I'm surprised they released those. Some of the information is redacted. But in 1968 in New York, there was a meeting to there was something called the Croatian Committee for the Protection of Human Rights, quote, protection of human rights, also known as the Committee for the Rescue of Professor Draganovich. For instance, so you have highlight. This just shows like in this document, this was like this has the official Federal Bureau of Investigation stamp on this. I have a list of names of all these Croatians here that went to this conference. Like you probably Ustashi terrorists inside the United States. Draganovich was literally a Ustashi terrorist. But I just think it shows that like this Catholic diplomacy is nefarious, and they're always mobilizing and seeking to further their own ends. I just think people like recently people that's a the Ustashi, for example, like what these Catholic professors hide at universities, for instance, well, like the whole Ustashi massacres in general, but the fact that like the Ustashis like never went away. They've been committing all sorts of terrorist acts all over the world.
Well, you see,
Since they were even disbanded in like the 40s, like recently up in Kosovo in the 90s, there was like Ustashi led terrorists against the Serbs, and like all the via Draganovich here, like you see according to the FBI documentation, was there was a meeting to liberate. This took place in actually Cleveland, Ohio. This meeting took place. But yeah, I just recommend people look into those files on and actually read. It's actually the Jesuit priest Dragutin Camber. He was located in Toronto, Canada at this time. It says he attended this. Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, and actually I digitized this book, and this is also in two books I put on my page. This Jesuit priest Dragutin Camber. Actually, Afro Manhattan writes about him. He was a Jesuit who was a Ustashi who ordered like the death of thousands of Orthodox Serbs, and he actually became like a chief of police in Bosnia after the Ustashi genocides, and became like an American citizen as well. For instance, that's crazy though that this Jesuit Dragutin Camber was meeting in Cleveland, Ohio, February 18th, 1968, for the Committee on the Liberation of Krunislav Draganovich, like a psychotic, like Ustashi, like maniac, was being like celebrated, by like the Catholic deep state in the U.S. I just thought this was very revealing, and it's just history that like the apologists and the prostituted like professors at all these and that's what they really do. Like they're Emmanuel Josephson used this term, but like they're like prostituting themselves to serve papacy. Like they're knowingly like gatekeeping and like twisting facts to like manipulate people. And
or omitting facts. It's just like they're committing crimes of or sins of omission and commission, and
disinformation by omission is very powerful. Yeah, they'll and that just that's where like some of the most effective anti-Semitic propaganda is, when they actually expose like the inner operations of the deep state, and then they blame it on the Jews after. But they blame it on the Jews after, like telling you how the banking system works, for example.
Okay, and you have a number of things in play here. You have the general dumbing down of the population in terms of, say, education, food, chlorine, vaccines, you name chemtrails, and you have these people who write these books, and they'll give you some truth, but they'll mislead you. Okay. In conclusion, as I said, I've gone to my local state college I've gone to a few of these presentations on the Holocaust, genocides, and other genocides of the 20th century. And two of the three professors that have said are somehow affiliated with the Catholic Church. The last speaker who actually talked to the World War II genocide, Peter Hayes, grew up Irish Roman Catholic. He's a homosexual. And the speaker that I heard a few weeks ago is a Sunni Muslim from Pakistan who teaches at Manhattan College, a Christian Brothers school, the same school that where Rudy Giuliani got his undergrad degree. And this professor at Manhattan College was talking about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, how they're similar and the similarities and differences. And she was just preaching the hardcore alt-left style dialectic. She was talking about you know, why nationalism is rising uh, in Europe and in other places, but particularly Europe, and why this is a bad thing. This is in response to this all these poor Muslim refugees that are coming to these countries. Although, so she's building empathy and sympathy for the Muslims who are in Europe, and she's vilifying the Europeans who don't want these people there. They want their countries for themselves. I mean, and that's I mean, if you're from Sweden, you have the right to live with Swedes. If you're from Denmark, you have the right to live with other Danes. And you're not being cruel. I mean, there's plenty of other places where these refugees could go. And and the Jesuits know that the 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 Muslims who are coming into these European countries, well, not just Europe, but these countries, for the most part, are making no attempt whatsoever to assimilate. They're not trying to learn the laws and customs and language of their new countries. They're just there to take over. And if you even question this level and criticize it, you're considered to be a bigot. You're considered to be a white nationalist, a white supremacist. And it's the same thing here in America. If you even question our immigration laws, you're basically pillared in public.
No, absolutely. Very, very well said, George. Yeah, that's yeah, that the religious bigotry card has been like one of their most effective tools, and
And,
keeping the public like completely duped.
well, okay, well, let me just clarify. So we've discussed this before, and this is according to Alberto, and I think it's true. And this is the Vatican created Islam about 1400 years ago in the early 7th century AD for a number of reasons. One, to conquer the so-called Holy Land for the Vatican, but that was one of the reasons. Another one was to take out her enemies, the Visigoths in Spain, the Donatists in North Africa, those whom groups that the Catholic Church deemed to be heretical. Whether they were heretics, that's another conversation altogether. And the Muslims did that. However, once they did capture Jerusalem, they did double crossed the Vatican. They said, you know what? We decided we're going to keep it for ourselves. And that was, and of course, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, there was a split in Islam between Muhammad's sons and his generals. The generals in so there was basically a civil war, and the generals, for the most part, won out. They formed the Sunnis, and Muhammad's sons, they formed the Shia. And there's been bad blood between them ever since. As a matter of fact, this is besides the point. I mean, there's so much acrimony between the Shia and Sunnis. The Sunnis consider they both consider each other heretics. And well, anyhow, so a major goal of the Catholic Church, and specifically the Jesuits, since the time of the Reformation, was to regain control of Islam, at least the Sunni branch. And at some point, I'm not sure when, they were able to do that. They were able to essentially bring the Sunnis
Well,
back into power.
recently, 2007, the King Abdullah went to the Vatican, like a Muslim Saudi king, and was knighted into the Catholic, Order of the Golden Circle, or the
Okay, so
Golden Fleece. Sorry, not the Order of the Golden Fleece. So, when the Order of the Golden Fleece is, you can look it up. It's a strictly Roman Catholic order. So, what's a Muslim king, doing getting knighted into a strictly Roman Catholic order?
yeah,
Very odd to say the least. It shows that they're working together.
and of course, Johnny, I thought this before, but I was talking to Johnny a few days ago, and he said, of course, one of the terms we bandy about is papal court puppet Jew. Well, there does you could say there is such a thing as a papal court puppet Muslim, because they'll use them as well. And this is my this is speculation. For the most part, they'll control their leaders, like their princes or their prime ministers or whatever, and they really or their generals and the leaderships of their countries, the Muslim countries, they really don't care about their own people, and they deem their own people to be expendable. Um, Now, one of the problems the Vatican has had over the years is sometimes their puppets will get out of line, as you were talking about earlier. That could very well have been the case with Muammar Gaddafi. He was not towing the party line.
Well, I agree. He had historical. I think with the Reagan administration, like he, if I'm not mistaken, like nationalized Libyan's oil, which was I'm sure frustrated the Jesuits. Yeah, and I'm sure there were coups, attempts to take them out. They
Well,
do like, and the Jesuits. We should. It's getting late here, George. I'll probably wrap it up here with this. If you want to sum up something up, but I'll close it off like what you described. People should look into the Jesuit doctrine of tyrannicide, and what that posits is that when a leader becomes quote like unsubservient to the Holy Church, that a leader or like this applies to kings, presidents. When a president like Gaddafi, for instance, or Chavez, or Abraham Lincoln, Juarez in Mexico, when a president turns against the church, he becomes a heretic and a tyrant. And the Jesuit Juan Mariana was the main positor of this theory, but they wrote how um, it is lawful and like just and required for uh, that heretical king to be murdered and a new Catholic king to be placed on the throne. That's servant to the church. It's a
well,
very
you mentioned
controversial
Benito Juarez.
doctrine. Like the doctrine itself, got the Jesuits banned from probably like 8 different countries, but like they did write. It's called the doctrine of tyrannicide, but like they did write how it's okay to assassinate people if they turn against the church, and to put a new puppet like on the throne.
And of course, Juarez was a devout, lifelong Roman Catholic, but he wasn't.
And it's like Chavez was also even
And of course,
in Venezuela.
okay, so was Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His crime or his sin was he didn't want to persecute the Orthodox in his empire. His attitude was, "Come on, fellas." When it's talking, you probably had a conversation. He said, when it's talking to the judge, "Come on, fellas, this is the 20th century. This is not the 16th century, or 17th century. Let's bygones be bygones." And they said, "Well, you know what? You're absolutely right. You should be bygone." So he had a little mishap.
Well, actually, in Georgia, in the book, actually, this would be maybe a good way to end off. In the book, The Jesuits and the Globalization, that was written in like 2016, published by Georgetown. There was a line where like the Jesuits had like a centennial Congress meeting like a week before Franz Ferdinand was killed.
Mhm.
This was literally in like the Jesuits' own source. It's almost I think they're kind of like bragging about that subtly. But yeah, I'll find the quote even and send that to you this week. I think you'd find it fascinating. Yeah, like the Jesuits had a meeting in Europe, like the high level Jesuits, right before Franz Ferdinand was killed. And I think the dialogue you portrayed, George, there was very accurate to probably what happened.
Well, okay, and I was just thinking, how many, and that was a huge kickoff of all the massive bloodshed that would take place. That just was commonly called World War One, but the Russian Civil War, the Spanish Civil War.
Well, in Germany, the Kaiser said Kaiser Wilhelm said Germany would become the Pope told him that the Germany would become the sword of the church.
And of course, and you're not talking about that long ago, 1914, just over 100 years ago. Um, how many people have died in all these wars?
Oh, it's
Constant killing. Are you
like
talking 100 million?
recently,
Two,
I wanted to, the death toll in Iraq alone, I want to say is a million plus now. Just recently, we have World War II. I think what was the official like 30, 35 million. That's probably low.
oh,
80,
talking, you're talking
80.
at least eight. I mean, you're talking about at
Yeah,
least 20 million in Russia alone.
yeah, probably. Yeah, so almost 100 million. Like, it's crazy. Like,
And if you that was bad, and the world's population was less than half of what it is now. So 80 million would be actually like 160 million.
yeah, talk about a bloodletting event. Like, holy cow.
I mean, it almost seemed like a spiritual, like a religious event. They had to have all these blood sacrifice to placate their,
Well, it
monarch.
basically was like it was so stupid. Like the way that they would send the soldiers across, a complete open field, like to get slaughtered. Like they
Oh,
were
yeah.
treating the soldiers as guinea pigs. Like like the quote unquote war of attritions, where they would just send like thousands of men across a field, in complete open warfare. So you could just get like bombs, rained on them and get shot at by tanks and just hundreds of thousands of that millions of soldiers needlessly lost their lives just on that you know front alone. Like the stupid like uh military like planning by the generals. Like literally like, an example of this was the show The Pacific even did a what was the name of this airfield? There's an airfield. I forget the name of this airfield. There was a famous battle in the Pacific where the American soldiers had to like cross this airstrip, but like they literally could have like went around the airstrip and like bombed the Japanese side from the air, but they decided to let thousands of American soldiers just run across the airfield in the open and just get like slaughtered by the Japanese. They ended up, capturing that airstrip, but probably, 1,200 to 1,500 American soldiers, died for no real reason. Like they could have captured that airstrip without sending all their soldiers way like wide out into the open. Like there's just a lot of stupid, military strategy like that, which shows to the it shows that it's not like it was kind of like like a bloodletting in a way, like it's mass sacrifice, like
Yeah, if
it's
you
not an
think,
understatement.
and of course, you had, boy, we could go on for hours. However, you're right. It's pushing. I mean, it's almost 3 o'clock your time. It's almost midnight my time. So I guess we can talk during the week to set up another time to do another show.
Yeah, we'll keep in touch throughout the week. Yeah, we'll do. I'll be free to do one later in the week.
Okay, well, take care, Eric.
Yeah, you too, George. All the best, and yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Take care,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you.
See ya.